The cuffs were too tight. Lena didn't say anything when they clicked shut. She looked at the judge first, then at the row of cameras already rising like metal flowers in the aisle. Her face didn't break. Not there. But her right hand shook once before she pressed it still against the defense table. Across the room, a man in a gray janitor's uniform stopped pushing his cart. He had been mopping the hallway outside 10 minutes earlier, head down, invisible. Now he stood in the open doorway of the courtroom, staring at the screen where her face filled every monitor. Corporate espionage. The word hung in the air, heavy and wrong. He felt something settle inside his chest. Not anger, not surprise, recognition. And then the old instinct he had buried years ago began to wake up. The room didn't breathe. That was what Lena noticed first, not the cameras, not the whispering, not even the word espionage echoing off wood and marble like it belonged there. The air felt used up. She kept her shoulders straight. She had practiced that posture for years. Boardrooms, negotiations, hostile interviews. Calm was a decision. It always had been. Even now. Especially now. The prosecutor was still speaking. Something about encrypted transfers, offshore routing, intellectual property theft. The language sounded clean, clinical, like they were describing a spreadsheet error, not a life. Her attorney leaned in and whispered something about procedural delays, about appeals. His voice had a thin edge she had never heard before. He didn't meet her eyes. That was when she knew. This wasn't confusion. It was already decided. Across the aisle, Victor Reeves sat 3 rows back. Not in the front where reporters could capture him clearly, but not hidden either. He wore a dark suit that fit him like armor. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply watched. When the judge ordered her held pending investigation, Lena felt something inside her go very still. It wasn't fear. Fear would have been easier. Fear would have been easier. Fear moved. Fear reacted. This was different. The quiet closing. The bailiff approached. The cuffs came out. Metal against skin. Too tight. She didn't look down. The cameras rose in a slow wave, flashes breaking across the courtroom walls. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered her name like it was already past tense. Her right hand trembled once. She pressed it flat against the table and willed it to stop. Across the doorway, the janitor had frozen mid-step. Graham Keaton had learned how to disappear. Years ago, when the Bar Association stripped his license and the headlines called him reckless, unethical, dangerous to the integrity of the court, he had discovered something about invisibility. It was easier than fighting. You kept your head down. You did your job. You avoided eye contact. People spoke freely around you because they didn't register you as someone who could understand them, a man with a cart. That was all. He had been wiping down the corridor railings when the courtroom doors opened. He hadn't meant to look inside, but he had heard her name, Lena Hartwell. He knew it. Everyone did. Founder of Hartwell Biotech. Youngest CEO to take her company public in a decade. Ruthless in negotiation, some said. Brilliant, others insisted. A disruptor. He had read about her once during a night shift break, scrolling through an old phone with a cracked screen. She had testified before Congress about pharmaceutical pricing reforms. She hadn't flinched then either. Now she stood in cuffs. Espionage. The charge didn't sit right. Graham watched the prosecutor shuffle papers, watched the defense lawyer avoid eye contact, watched Victor Reeves sit perfectly still. Reeves owned half the city, depending on how you counted. Infrastructure contracts, media holdings, a private security firm with government ties. He and Lena had clashed publicly over regulatory proposals last year. Graham remembered that. He also remembered how Reeves handled obstacles. Quietly, the bailiff began leading her toward the side exit reserved for detainees. Something tightened in Graham's throat. He told himself it wasn't his business. He had promised himself that years ago, after the hearing. After the suspension turned permanent. After his father stopped answering his calls. Stay out of it. He gripped the mop handle harder. Lena walked past him without looking up, close enough that he could see the faint indentation where the cuff pressed into her wrist. close enough to notice that her breathing was too measured, controlled. He had seen that before. Clients who knew the system wasn't bending toward them. Clients who understood that facts didn't always matter when money shifted the scale. He felt the old reflex stir analysis, angles, procedural flaws. He shut it down. Not his case. Not his life. The hallway cleared slowly. Reporters rushed toward the front entrance instead. The echo of shoes faded. Lena stopped when the bailiff adjusted his grip to check paperwork. Just for a second, her eyes moved. They landed on Graham, not on his face, on the cart. Then higher. A brief flicker of assessment. Habit. Measuring a room even now. She didn't ask for help. She didn't plead. But something passed through her expression, an almost imperceptible calculation, as if she were cataloging every witness to this moment. Graham looked away first. He told himself he had imagined it. He returned to the hallway he'd been mopping. The water in the bucket had gone gray. He wrung the mop out harder than necessary. An hour later, the courthouse buzz had shifted. News vans lined the street. Social feeds were already rewriting her biography. Corporate thief. Fraud. Another tech empire built on stolen research. Graham finished his shift in silence. He changed in the maintenance closet, folding the gray uniform carefully. His reflection in the small mirror above the sink looked older than he felt, lines at the corners of his mouth that hadn't been there before. He hadn't stepped inside a courtroom as an attorney in 8 years. He told himself he didn't miss it. That night he couldn't sleep. The news cycle replayed in his mind. Not the spectacle. The details. Encrypted transfers routed through Hartwell's internal servers. Confidential data sent to a competitor overseas. Authorization signatures tied directly to her credentials. Too direct. Too clean. He sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the wall. He knew how cases like this were built. Digital evidence presented as airtight. Jurors overwhelmed with technical jargon. Intent inferred from proximity. He also knew how digital evidence could be planted. He pressed his palms flat against the table. Not your fight. He stood up. Poured water he didn't drink. Sat down again. By morning, the decision had already been made, though he hadn't admitted it yet. He requested a visitor form during his next shift. The clerk barely looked at him. Family? No, he said. Press? No. The clerk paused then. Legal. The word sat between them. Graham hesitated. It had been a long time since he'd used it for himself. Yes, he said quietly. The clerk frowned at his uniform. You her lawyer? Not yet. The clerk snorted, stamped the paper anyway. Visiting hours start at 2. When Graham stepped back into the hallway, the courthouse felt different, not louder, sharper. He passed the courtroom where she had stood the day before. The door was closed now. Another case underway. Another life shifting. He didn't go inside. At 2 o'clock, he stood in the detention visitation room, hands folded loosely in front of him. The door on the other side opened. Lena walked in without cuffs this time, though 2 guards lingered by the wall. She wore the same navy suit from yesterday. It hadn't been wrinkled. She sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. She studied him the way she might review a contract carefully, without showing what she thought. You clean the 3rd floor? She said finally. Her voice was steady. Yes. You watched yesterday. It wasn't a question. Yes. A small pause. Why are you here? Graham held her gaze. Because the evidence is wrong. Because I've seen this before. Because Victor Reeves doesn't lose without planning 3 moves ahead. He didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, I think you're being set up. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers, resting on the metal table, curled slightly inward. That's a strong statement, she said. I don't make it lightly. Silence again. You're not a reporter, she said. No. Not press. No. She tilted her head just slightly. Then who are you? Graham exhaled once. I used to be an attorney. The word used settled between them. And now? She asked. Now I push a cart. One corner of her mouth moved, not amusement. Recognition. Why would a former attorney risk attaching himself to this? She asked. He thought about the hearing 8 years ago, about the mistake he had made, the client he had trusted when he shouldn't have. The document he hadn't verified closely enough before submitting it to the court. It had cost him everything. Because I didn't fight hard enough then? Because I know what it looks like when power rearranges the truth. Because the case doesn't make sense, he said instead. And because no one else in that room looked surprised. That got her attention. Her eyes sharpened. "Except you," she said. "Yes." She leaned back slightly, measuring him again. "You understand that if you're wrong," she said quietly, "you're aligning yourself with someone the country believes is a criminal." "I understand. And if you're right?" He held her gaze. "Then someone powerful made a mistake." The faintest shift in her breathing. Outside the room, a guard cleared his throat. Lena looked down at her hands for a moment. When she looked back up, something had changed. Not trust, not yet, but permission. "I didn't authorize any transfers," she said. "I don't need to steal research. My company creates it." "I believe you," Graham said. The words felt heavier than they should have. She studied him for a long second. "You said you used to be an attorney," she said. "Why did you stop?" He didn't answer right away. "Because I lost a case I should have won," he said finally. "That happens." "Yes," he agreed, "but this one cost someone more than money." She nodded once. "Then don't lose this one," she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hopeful. It was a simple instruction. The guard stepped forward. "Time." Lena stood. Graham remained seated for a second longer, watching her straighten her jacket. When she walked toward the door, she didn't look back. He did, and for the first time in 8 years, he felt the weight of the courtroom settling onto his shoulders again. Not as punishment, as responsibility. He didn't tell anyone. That was the first rule he gave himself. No announcements, no declarations about returning to law, no speeches to an empty kitchen about redemption. He went home after the visit and sat in the same chair he always sat in. The apartment was quiet in the way. Small places are every sound noticeable, every shift of weight echoing. He took an old storage box down from the top shelf of his closet. It was heavier than he remembered. Inside were case files he had never thrown away. A legal pad with his name still printed at the top in firm letterhead that no longer existed. His bar certificate, rolled tight, rubber band brittle and cracked. He didn't unroll it. He reached instead for his old laptop. It wheezed when it started, the fan loud in the silence. The battery no longer held charge. He kept it plugged into the wall. He searched for the indictment. It was everywhere. Digital copies. Commentary. Analysts breaking down the obvious evidence. Graphics showing data trails in bright lines, as if that made them true. He downloaded the official filing and read it slowly. Too slowly, maybe. Every paragraph felt deliberate. The transfers were listed with timestamps precise to the second. Internal access logs showed Lena's credentials initiating the data export. The receiving server belonged to a biotech firm based overseas, one that had quietly partnered with Reeves Industries 2 months ago. He stopped there. That detail was buried halfway down page 12. No headlines mentioned it. He leaned back and closed his eyes. A partnership that recent would have required non-disclosure agreements, private negotiations, quiet moves. He reopened the file. The prosecution argued motive, regulatory pressure, competitive strain, alleged financial losses in Hartwell Biotech's latest quarter. He knew enough about public filings to question that. Losses weren't unusual in R&D cycles. They were expected. He checked. Hartwell Biotech's quarterly report showed controlled setbacks, not collapse. Cash reserves, stable. Investor confidence, steady. So why risk everything? He pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose. Because someone needed her removed. The thought came cleanly. He didn't like how easily it formed. He moved to the digital evidence section. Server logs. Authentication markers. Internal IP addresses. On the surface, airtight. But something in the timing bothered him. The transfers had occurred late at night. between 2017 a.m. and 2024 a.m. on 3 separate dates. He searched interviews. Lena was known for working late, but her public calendar showed a fundraising event on the second date, one that ran until midnight across town. Photos confirmed it. Press coverage timestamped. Could she have logged in remotely afterward? Yes. Would she have needed to? Not likely. He made notes, not conclusions, just questions. At 3 in the morning he realized he hadn't moved in hours. His back ached. The room felt smaller. He closed the laptop and sat still. This wasn't enough. He needed access. The next day, during his shift, he pushed his card past the records office slower than usual. He knew the clerk inside Marion. Mid-50s. Kind when she wanted to be. Sharp always. He had fixed a leak in her ceiling last winter. He knocked lightly on the open door. She glanced up. If it's about the vending machine again, I already called maintenance. It's not, he said. She noticed his tone. Set her pen down. What is it? He stepped inside and lowered his voice. The Hartwell case. Her mouth tightened immediately. We don't discuss active cases. I'm not asking for discussion. She waited. I need to see the discovery list. She stared at him like he'd asked for her car keys. You? She said quietly. Why? He didn't offer speech. Because something's wrong. She leaned back in her chair, studying him in a way that made him feel transparent. You're not licensed anymore, she said. I know. And you're mopping floors. Yes. A long pause. She stood, walked to the door, and shut it. You didn't hear this from me, she said. But the defense team already requested additional time. They're overwhelmed. With what? Wyam. The prosecution dumped nearly 2 terabytes of digital evidence. It's a flood. Emails, server logs, financials. That's deliberate, he said, before he could stop himself. Marion raised an eyebrow. You still think like one? He didn't answer. She crossed her arms. You can't access the files directly, not without clearance. I don't need everything, he said. Just the authentication trail summaries. That's restricted. I know. She walked back to her desk slowly. I could lose my job, she said. He nodded. I'm not asking you to risk it, he replied. She studied him again. You always were stubborn, she muttered. He hadn't realized she remembered him from before. Without another word, she turned to her computer. Typed. Scrolled. The printer hummed softly. She handed him a thin stack of pages. 5 minutes, she said. Then they go back in the file. He didn't thank her. Gratitude would have made it bigger than it was. He read standing there. IP addresses matched internal Hartwell servers, access points listed as secure executive channel. But one line stood out. 2-factor authentication verified via mobile token device. He frowned. Most executive systems used biometric verification tied to secure hardware. Tokens were backup methods. He flipped to the second transfer. Same token verification. Third. Same. Does she use token backup often? He asked. Marion shrugged. Not my company. He handed the pages back. Thank you. He left before she could change her mind. Back in the hallway, he leaned against the wall briefly. If Lena's credentials had been used, and if token verification was triggered, then either she initiated it herself, or someone had access to her physical device. He remembered something she had said during their meeting. I don't need to steal research. It hadn't sounded defensive. It had sounded offended. That mattered. After his shift, he returned to the detention center. This time, she looked more tired. Not physically. Measured. They're offering a deal, she said before he could sit. What kind? Cooperation. Reduced charges if I provide internal documentation on pending regulatory reviews. He understood immediately. They didn't just want her company, they wanted leverage. You won't take it, he said. Her jaw tightened slightly. No. Good. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. You assume too much. I assume consistency, he replied. Silence. Then she leaned forward. What have you found? He placed his hands flat on the table. The authentication method on the transfers. Mobile token verification. Her eyes narrowed. That's impossible. Why? Because I don't use token backup. I disabled it 2 years ago after a breach scare. I require biometric hardware for executive access. He felt something cold settle under his ribs. Are you certain? Yes. No hesitation. Is there documentation of that policy? There should be. Internal IT logs. Yes. He nodded slowly. If token verification was logged, then either the records were altered, he said carefully, or a duplicate device was registered. She went very still. Only 3 people could authorize a duplicate, she said. My CTO, my head of security, or me. Do you trust them? She didn't answer right away. My CTO, yes, she said finally. Security, she stopped. What? He resigned last month. Accepted a position with Reeves and Frustachore. There it was. Neither spoke for several seconds. The guard shifted by the wall. Graham felt the shape of it forming now. Not proof. Not yet, but direction. If we can prove token authentication was falsified, he said quietly, the digital trail collapses. She watched him carefully. You said you lost a case once, she said. What happened? He swallowed. I trusted the wrong affidavit, he said. Didn't verify its source. It cost my client his freedom for 3 years before it was overturned. Her gaze softened, but only slightly. And your license? Revoked for negligence. She nodded once. Then don't trust anything in mine, she said. He almost smiled. Understood. The guard stepped forward again. Time. As she stood, she paused. You're not licensed, she said. You can't represent me. Not officially. Then what are you doing? He considered that. Building the case someone else should be building, he said. She held his gaze a second longer than before. Be careful, she said quietly. It wasn't concern for him. It was calculation. He understood that. As she walked away, he felt it again. That weight settling across his shoulders. He wasn't invisible anymore, and somewhere across the city, Victor Reeves was likely reviewing the same reports, confident in their precision. Graham stepped out into the fading light. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man hiding from his past. He felt like someone stepping back into it. And this time, he intended to read every line twice. The first threat didn't sound like one. It came as a polite voicemail. Graham listened to it standing in his kitchen, still in his work clothes, the gray shirt damp at the collar. Mr. Stritt, Keaton, the voice said smoothly. This is Daniel Price from Reeves Infrastructure Legal Affairs. We've noticed your recent visits to Ms. Hartwell. Given your current employment status, we'd advise caution. Involvement in high-profile litigation can become complicated. We'd hate for misunderstandings to affect your position at the courthouse. A pause. If you'd like to discuss this further, my office is available. The message ended. Graham didn't replay it. He set the phone down carefully, as if it were fragile. They knew. Of course they knew. Visitor logs were easy to access for someone with influence. A quiet call. A quiet inquiry. A janitor visiting a billionaire under indictment. That alone would raise questions. He washed his hands slowly at the sink, though they weren't dirty. This was how pressure began. Not with shouting, with reminders. The next morning, his supervisor stopped him near the service elevator. Graham, he said, not unkindly, you've been mentioned. Graham waited. Administration prefers staff avoid entanglements with active defendants. Optics. I'm not speaking to press, Graham said. That's not the point. The supervisor shifted his weight. Just keep your head down. We don't need attention. Keep your head down. The phrase followed him all day. He had done that for years. It had not made him whole. That evening, he returned to the files. Marion had not offered more documents, and he hadn't asked. Instead, he focused on what was public and what Lena could remember. He made a timeline, 3 transfer dates, cross-referenced with Lena's calendar. Public appearances, internal board meetings, travel records. On the second transfer date, she had boarded a flight at 6 a.m. for a biotech summit in Boston. Security footage from the airport confirmed her arrival at 4:45 a.m. The data export on that date occurred at 5:12 a.m. He stared at the numbers. Could she have logged in from the airport lounge? Yes. Would biometric hardware have been available there? Unlikely. And if token verification was triggered instead, it contradicted her policy. He wrote one word in the margin of his notebook. Proximity. Who had access to her devices? He needed more. The next visit to the detention center felt different. The guards were less casual. One of them checked his ID twice. Lena sat down across from him with a folder in her hands this time. "They've restricted my company access," she said. "But I've memorized most of what matters." He believed that. "Tell me about your security protocols," he said. She didn't hesitate. "Executive credentials are tiered. Primary access requires biometric confirmation through a dedicated hardware key. Backup token verification is disabled by default." "You said you disabled it 2 years ago." "Yes, after an attempted phishing attack targeting our CFO." "Who implemented that change?" "My CTO and head of security at the time." "The one who left?" "Yes." She folded her hands on the table. "I didn't think twice about his resignation," she said. "People move." He cited better compensation. "Did he leave on good terms?" She paused. "He was defensive in the last few months. Argued against our decision to decline a joint venture with Reeves' subsidiary." Graham felt the pieces shifting again. Decline based on what? Data privacy concerns. Their terms required broader data sharing than I was comfortable with. He nodded slowly. "And 2 months later, you're accused of sending proprietary data to a company partnered with Reeves." "Yes." The silence stretched. "Could your CTO have authorized a duplicate token device without your knowledge?" he asked. She considered it. "Technically, yes, with security's cooperation." "And that security chief now works for Reeves?" "Yes." Her jaw tightened slightly. She wasn't angry. She was rearranging her internal map. "If they registered a duplicate device," Graham said carefully, "they could authenticate transfers under your credentials. They would still need internal access, which someone with security clearance would have." She leaned back. "You're suggesting an internal breach coordinated with Reeves." "I'm suggesting the possibility." She studied him. "You're careful with your words," she said. "I have to be." A faint shadow crossed her expression. "Be careful anyway," she said. After the visit, Graham didn't go straight home. He walked. The city at night had a different soundless performance. More truth. Office lights still on in high-rise windows. Cleaning crews moving through lobbies. Drivers idling at curbs. He passed one of Reeves Infrastructure's buildings. Tall, glass, impersonal. He didn't stop. The next morning, Marion avoided eye contact. That told him enough. He waited until her lunch break before approaching. "Someone asked about you," she said before he could speak. "I assumed. They requested visitor logs. Specifically yours." He nodded. "I didn't say anything," she added quickly. "You didn't need to." She studied him, worry softening her usual sharpness. "You're poking something big," she said. "Yes. Bigger than your last mistake." He felt that land. "Yes." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There's something else. An addendum filed late last night. Sealed. By whom? Reeves' legal team. Motion to intervene on grounds of corporate damage." His stomach tightened. "They're positioning themselves as victims," he said. "Yes, that expands their access to discovery." Marion nodded. He exhaled slowly. Victor Reeves wasn't just watching. He was stepping inside the case. That afternoon, Graham received another call. This one was not polite. "Mr. Keaton," the voice said. "Different man. Colder. You're involving yourself in matters beyond your credentials. We suggest you reconsider. Past disciplinary actions can resurface in inconvenient ways." The line went dead. He stood in the supply closet, phone still at his ear. His past. They were digging. He felt a flicker of heat in his chest. Not fear. Shame. He had buried that hearing deep. The transcript. The questions about negligence. The panel's decision read in a room too quiet. He had told himself he deserved it. Maybe he had, but this was different. That night, he called someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Thomas Hale answered on the third ring. "What do you want, Graham?" No greeting. "I need a favor," Graham said. A short, humorless laugh. "You don't get favors." "I know." Silence. Thomas had been his colleague once. Brilliant litigator, now partner at a mid-sized firm. "I'm not asking you to represent anyone," Graham said. "Just to review something, off the record." Another pause. "You're involved in that Hartwell mess," Thomas said. "Yes." "You're not licensed." "I'm aware." "Then what are you doing?" "Trying not to make the same mistake twice." The line was quiet for a long moment. "Send me what you have," Thomas said finally. "No promises." Graham closed his eyes briefly. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." After the call, he sat in the dark for a while. He hadn't realized how alone he had let himself become. The next visit with Lena felt heavier. "They're freezing company assets," she said. "Board members are nervous." "Are they loyal?" he asked. "Some," she said. "Others are practical." He understood that. "Victor Reeves met with 2 of them yesterday," she added. He looked up sharply. "How do you know?" "I still have allies." A faint, tired edge to her voice. "They're pressuring for a leadership vote," she said. "If I'm removed as CEO, control shifts." "And Reeves benefits," Graham said. "Yes." The walls of the room seemed closer. "You could step aside temporarily," he said. She shook her head immediately. "That's what they want. Sometimes stepping aside buys time. And sometimes it confirms guilt." He watched her carefully. "You're carrying more than your company," he said quietly. She didn't answer. But he could see it. Employees, research teams, patients waiting on treatments and development. This wasn't about reputation. It was about work unfinished. "If they force a vote," he asked. "I fight it," she said simply. He nodded. Outside the glass, one of the guards shifted again. Time. As she stood, she paused. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. He didn't deflect this time. "Because I know what it's like to watch a room decide your story for you," he said. She held his gaze. "And because—" He swallowed. "And because I didn't fight hard enough the last time someone needed me to." Something in her expression softened, not sympathy. Understanding. "Then don't stop halfway," she said. He wouldn't. As he left the facility, his phone buzzed. An email from Thomas. One sentence. "The token authentication logs are too perfect. Real systems glitch." Graham felt a slow, steady clarity settle in his chest. Perfection was suspicious, and somewhere in those flawless logs was a seam. He just had to find it. The first real crack didn't come from a file. It came from a person. Thomas refused to meet in his office. They sat instead in a narrow diner 2 blocks from the courthouse. Mid-afternoon lull. Coffee burnt. No one paying attention. Thomas looked older, not in the dramatic way, just settled. Expensive watch. Controlled posture. He slid a tablet across the table. "I ran a comparison," he said. "Public authentication logs from other corporate breach cases. Normal systems show irregularities. Failed attempts, time drifts, human error." Graham nodded. "These?" Thomas tapped the screen. "Clean. Every timestamp aligned to the second. No latency variation across 3 separate nights." "Too precise," Graham said. "Exactly." Thomas leaned back. "You don't fake perfection unless you assume no one will look closely." Graham traced one of the timestamps with his finger. "Could someone rewrite the log database entirely?" he asked. "With high-level access, yes. Especially if they control security infrastructure." "Which Reeves' former hire did." Thomas studied him. "You're building a conspiracy," he said evenly. "I'm following incentives." Thomas didn't argue. Instead, he said, "There's more. The token ID numbers. They're sequential." Graham looked up. Sequential how? Each authentication event lists a token device ID. In most systems, those are randomized at issuance. These increment by one digit across the three transfers. Graham felt something shift inside his chest. So either three different token devices were issued back to back, he said slowly, or someone generated them manually. Thomas nodded once. And if the company policy disabled token backup 2 years ago, he added, no new tokens should have been issued at all. Silence stretched between them. Can you testify to this? Graham asked. Thomas gave him a look. You know I can't attach myself to this without formal engagement, and you're not licensed. I know. Thomas stirred his coffee, though. He hadn't added anything to it. You're stepping into something large, he said. Reeves doesn't bluff. I've noticed. And you're exposed. Graham almost smiled at that. I've been exposed before. Thomas didn't return the expression. Be smarter this time, he said quietly. When they parted, Graham didn't feel triumphant. He felt the shape of danger more clearly. He walked back toward the courthouse, hands in his coat pockets. A black sedan idled across the street. It pulled away when he noticed it. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. That evening he drafted a document. Not a legal motion, he couldn't sign one, but a structured analysis of the authentication anomalies, sequential token IDs, improbable timestamp precision, policy contradiction. He sent it to Lena's official defense attorney with a short message. These discrepancies require forensic review. Urgent. The reply came hours later. Who is this? He stared at the screen. He typed back, someone who believes your client is being framed. No response after that. He expected resistance. The attorneys protected their territory, especially high-profile ones. But he couldn't wait for permission. The next visit with Lena carried a different energy. They're accelerating the hearing schedule, she said before sitting fully. Motion to fast-track pretrial review. Reeves intervened, Graham said. Yes. She watched his face carefully. You found something, she said. Possibly. He outlined the sequential token IDs first, her brow furrowed slightly. That's not random, she said. No. Show me. He slid handwritten notes across the table. She read quickly. And the timestamps? She asked. Aligned to the second across separate nights, no drift. She leaned back slowly. They're overconfident, she murmured. Or rushed. She looked at him. Which is worse? He considered that. Rushed mistakes can be exposed. Overconfidence leads to escalation. A guard coughed lightly. They ignored it. Can we subpoena internal IT change logs? She asked. Your attorney can. She exhaled through her nose. He's overwhelmed. And cautious. Caution is understandable. Yes, she said, but time isn't neutral. No, it wasn't. Do you trust him? Graham asked. She hesitated. He's competent. But this scale intimidates most firms. He understood. Victor Reeves's legal network was vast. Deep pockets meant deep patience. Then we pushed the forensic angle, Graham said. Force them to defend the logs under expert review. And if they counter with their own experts, they will. Silence settled between them. Then she asked, why are you willing to risk your job for this? He looked down at the metal table. I lost my license because I didn't verify a document thoroughly, he said. A falsified financial statement slipped through. I believed my client when I shouldn't have. She didn't interrupt. By the time it was corrected, he'd already served 3 years. The appellate court reversed it. But that doesn't give time back. Her hands were still. I told myself I deserved what happened after, he continued. That stepping away was accountability. And now, she asked quietly. Now I think stepping away was easier than staying. She held his gaze. I don't need you to redeem yourself, she said. I know. I need you to be precise. He nodded. I will be. When he left the detention center, the sky was low and gray. The air smelled like rain. Halfway to his apartment, 2 men approached him from opposite directions on the sidewalk. Not in suits, plain jackets, neutral expressions. One stopped in front of him. "Mr. Keaton." "Not a question." "Yes. You've been making inquiries." "I read public documents," Graham said evenly. The second man stepped slightly closer. "Curiosity can be misinterpreted," he said, "especially given your disciplinary history." There it was again. The old hearing. "You've accessed restricted files," the first man added. "I haven't. Be certain of that." Graham felt his pulse in his throat, but his voice stayed level. "Is there a point to this conversation?" "Yes," the man said. "Detach yourself. Immediately." "And if I don't?" A brief pause. "Consequences escalate." They didn't touch him. They didn't raise their voices. They simply walked away. Graham stood still for several seconds. Not fear, not quite, but the awareness that this was no longer theoretical. He returned home and locked the door. For the first time since starting this, he checked the windows. Then he sat down and wrote everything that had happened. Dates, times, descriptions of the men, the voicemail, the warnings. Documentation mattered. If something happened to him, there would be a record. His phone buzzed again. A message from Marion. "Internal audit scheduled tomorrow." Unusual. He closed his eyes briefly. They were cleaning, either covering tracks or tightening them. He called Lena's attorney directly this time. "This is harassment," the attorney said sharply after hearing about the sidewalk encounter. "It's pressure," Graham corrected. "You're not part of the legal team." "No. But your client is being cornered." Silence. Then, reluctantly, "Send me your full analysis. We'll file a motion for independent forensic examination." "Do it quickly," Graham said. "I don't take instruction from—" "I know," Graham cut in quietly. "Just don't wait." After the call, he sat in the dim light of his apartment. His chest felt tight now. Not from fear of Reeves. From something else. Responsibility. He had stepped into this. No one forced him. If he miscalculated again, he stopped the thought. Precision, Lena had said. Not redemption. Precision. The next morning, headlines shifted slightly. Defense challenges digital evidence. Small shift, but visible. He saw Reeves's photo attached to an article about corporate accountability. Calm. Composed. The man did not look worried. That unsettled Graham more than threats. Because people who worry make mistakes. People who feel secure escalate. That afternoon, Lena called through her attorney's arranged line. "They've agreed to limited forensic review," she said. Reluctantly. "Limited how?" "Supervised access. Reeves experts present." Graham exhaled slowly. "Then we document everything," he said. "Every objection. Every restriction." "You sound like you're back in court," she observed. "I remember how it works." A pause. "Graham," she said. "Yes, if this turns worse, if they come after you directly, you can step away." He looked around his small apartment. There wasn't much here to lose. "I won't," he said. Silence on the line. "Then we move carefully," she said. "Yes." When the call ended, he sat very still. The waves weren't rising evenly. They came in pressure points. Quiet threats. Legal maneuvers. Public narrative shifts. And beneath it all, something patient. He had the sense now that Victor Reeves wasn't trying to win loudly. He was trying to exhaust them. And exhaustion, Graham knew too well, led to mistakes. He leaned back in his chair. He would not make another one. Not this time. The forensic review began in a room with no windows. That bothered Graham more than he expected. He wasn't officially inside the proceeding. He sat behind Lena's attorney, technically an independent consultant. The term had taken negotiation. Reeves' team objected twice before agreeing. Victor Reeves himself did not attend. He didn't need to. Two of his senior legal counsels were present, along with a digital forensics firm contracted by his corporation. Their lead analyst, a man in his early 40s with careful hands and a neutral voice, opened the session. "We're here to review authentication integrity," the analyst said. "All parties will observe protocol." Protocol. Graham folded his hands in front of him and listened. Lena sat to his left. She hadn't looked at him since entering the room, but he felt her awareness, not dependence. Alignment. The servers were mirrored onto secure review terminals. Layers of logs scrolled across screens. Lines of code. Timestamp clusters. Device identifiers. At first glance, everything looked exactly as it had in the prosecution's filing. Clean. Too clean. The analyst walked through the first transfer. User credential, L. Hartwell. Executive clearance, Tier 1. Secondary authentication, mobile token device ID 7X441. He paused. Token ID verified against system registry. Graham leaned slightly forward. "Can we see issuance records for that device?" he asked. Reeves' counsel turned immediately. "Who is he?" the counsel asked Lena's attorney. "Consultant," the attorney replied evenly. The analyst hesitated only a fraction of a second before pulling up another window. Device 7X441 issued on March 14th, 2 weeks before the first transfer. Graham felt something tighten. "Under whose authorization?" he asked. A longer pause this time. "Authorized by Chief Security Officer Daniel Crane," the analyst said. "Crane, the former head of security, now employed by Reeves Infrastructure." Lena didn't move, but her fingers pressed lightly into the table. "Company policy disabled token backups 2 years prior," Graham said calmly. "Why was a new one issued?" Reeves's counsel leaned forward. "Corporate policy adjustments occur routinely," he said. "Perhaps Ms. Hartwell reinstated it." The room shifted subtly toward her. She spoke without raising her voice. "I did not." The analyst cleared his throat. "There is an internal memo here," he said, scrolling. "Subject: temporary token reactivation for executive mobility." "Dated?" Graham asked. "March 13th. 1 day before issuance," Graham said. "Yes. Who authored it?" The analyst hesitated again. "Daniel Crane." Lena's attorney finally spoke. "Was Ms. Hartwell notified of this policy change?" The analyst scanned. "There is no direct email confirmation to her account." "Then why was her credential assigned to the device?" Graham asked. Breams asked. Reeves's counsel's tone sharpened slightly. "She was the executive user." "That wasn't the question," Graham replied quietly. The room stilled. The analyst clicked through additional logs. The device was registered under her executive profile automatically upon issuance. "Automatic registration without executive acknowledgement?" Lena's attorney asked. The analyst didn't answer immediately. "That would depend on system configuration," he said carefully. Graham wrote 3 words on his notepad. "Automatic. Without acknowledgement." "Let's move to timestamp analysis," Reeves's counsel interjected. "Of course." They shifted screens. The analyst highlighted the authentication times. Each event recorded at 02:17 trailed 02:19:48, 02:24:11 respectively on the first date. "Cross-reference system clock drift," Graham said. The analyst glanced at him. "Excuse me, server clock synchronization logs," Graham clarified. "Were they perfectly aligned to atomic time across those dates?" The analyst's expression changed slightly. "We'll check." He opened another window. Silence stretched. "Primary server drift, 0.87 seconds variance," he read. "And the authentication logs?" Graham asked. "0 variance." A faint crease appeared between the analyst's brows. "That's unusual," he admitted. "Why?" Lena's attorney pressed. "Because drift typically propagates into event logs unless manually corrected." "Manually corrected how?" Graham asked. "By log rewriting or synchronization override." Reeves's counsel stood abruptly. "This line of questioning implies tampering without proof." Graham didn't look at him. "I'm asking about system behavior," he said. The analyst shifted in his chair. "It is statistically improbable for 3 separate authentication events to show 0 drift if the primary server logged variance." There it was. Not an accusation. A crack. Lena's breathing remained steady. Graham felt it again. That quiet stillness he'd seen in her the first day. Not fear. Focus. They continued for 2 more hours. Every anomaly was small, technical, easy to dismiss in isolation. Sequential token IDs. Policy change without executive confirmation. Time-stamp perfection in an imperfect system. Individually, none of it proved sabotage. Together, it formed a pattern. When the session ended, Reeves's counsel's tone had cooled. "We will submit a formal response," he said. Victor Reeves still had not appeared. That meant he wasn't worried yet. Outside the review room, Lena walked beside Graham in silence until they reached a side corridor. "Cran," she said finally. "Yes, I trusted him." He didn't respond. "Not personally," she added. "Professionally. I trusted his competence." "That may have been the point," Graham said. She stopped walking. "Do you think Reeves orchestrated this directly?" she asked. He considered. "I think Reeves creates environments where loyalty shifts toward him," he said. "Whether he writes the script himself may not matter." She resumed walking. "He's pushing for my removal as CEO before trial," she said. "Yes, my board will fold if pressure continues." He watched her profile as they moved. "You could expose this now," he said quietly. "Publicly. The anomalies." She shook her head. "Too early. Without definitive proof, it sounds defensive." He nodded. She understood narrative timing better than most. They parted at the building exit. As Graham stepped onto the sidewalk, the same black sedan from earlier in the week was parked across the street again. This time, he didn't pretend not to notice. The driver watched him openly. Graham held the gaze for a moment. Then he walked. That night, his apartment door was slightly ajar when he returned. Just enough. His pulse spiked once, sharp and immediate. He pushed the door open slowly. Nothing overturned. Nothing broken. But the storage box from his closet sat on the kitchen table. Open. His old bar certificate unrolled. He stepped inside carefully. On top of the certificate lay a single sheet of paper. Typed. "Some doors are better left closed." No signature. He stood there for a long time. The air felt different. Not violated exactly, calculated. They weren't trying to scare him into panic. They were reminding him of history, of failure, of shame. He folded the paper once and set it aside. Then he re-rolled the certificate, not carefully this time. He put it back in the box, closed it, locked the door properly. Sat down. His hands were steady, but his chest felt tight. He thought about the hearing years ago, the panel reading its decision. The word negligence spoken without anger, without softness. He had accepted it then. This was not negligence. This was manipulation. He picked up his phone and dialed Lena's attorney. "They're escalating," he said simply. "What happened?" "They entered my apartment." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Call the police." "And report what? A warning note? No forced entry?" Silence. "We push harder," Graham said. "File motion to expand forensic scope. Include issuance authorization chain." "That will provoke them." "Yes." Another pause. "Are you sure you want to keep going?" the attorney asked quietly. Graham looked at the folded note on his table. "No," he said honestly. Silence. "But I will." He ended the call. For the first time since stepping back into this, he allowed himself to feel it fully, not fear, the cost. He understood now that this wasn't about proving Lena innocent in a narrow legal sense. It was about exposing a system flexible enough to rewrite reality when money applied pressure. And that kind of system did not yield gently. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Years ago, he had stepped away when things became complicated. This time, complication was the point. He would not leave. Not halfway. He didn't call the police. He cleaned the apartment instead. Not because it needed cleaning, because it gave his hands something to do. He wiped the kitchen counter twice, vacuumed slowly, checked the windows again. The lock on the back door had no scratch marks. Whoever entered had a key, or something better than a key. That narrowed the list. Not criminals, professionals. He slept lightly. Every small sound pulled him halfway awake. In the morning, he carried the warning note in his coat pocket to the courthouse. He didn't show it to Marion. He didn't show to anyone. Not yet. By mid-morning, Lena's attorney filed the motion to expand the forensic review. It was precise, technical, focused on authorization chain, policy override justification, and server drift reconciliation. It was also a direct accusation without using the word. Reeves's legal team responded within hours. Objection. Overreach. Harassment of corporate partners. The language was sharp now. Good, Graham thought. Pressure revealed shape. That afternoon, Lena requested an additional meeting. She looked thinner. Not physically. There was a narrowing around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "They're threatening criminal obstruction charges against my CTO," she said. Graham stilled. "Your current CTO?" "Yes. They're implying he failed to disclose token reinstatement." "Is that true?" "No." "Then it's leverage." She nodded once. "They're isolating everyone around me." He watched her carefully. "How are you holding up?" he asked. It slipped out before he could rephrase it. She didn't answer immediately. "I don't mind fighting," she said finally. "I mind collateral damage." He understood that more than he expected. "My client lost 3 years because I didn't verify something," he said quietly. "Collateral damage spreads quietly." Her gaze softened for a moment. "Then we limit it," she said. He took a breath. "I need access to your internal IT policy archive," he said. "The original documentation disabling token backups. I can authorize my attorney to request it. Do it formally, through court order. That will alert them. They're already alert." She leaned back, thinking. "You're changing," she said. "How?" "You're less cautious." He considered that. "I'm more precise," he said. A faint, tired, almost smile touched her mouth. "That's not the same thing." Before he could respond, the guard stepped closer. "Time again." As she stood, she hesitated. "If something happens to you," she said quietly, "this doesn't end." He held her gaze. "I'm aware." She studied him another second, then left. He stayed seated a moment longer. He hadn't told her about the apartment. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because saying it aloud would make the threat heavier. The expanded forensic hearing was scheduled 3 days later. In those 3 days, small things shifted. His supervisor informed him that his schedule would be restructured. Fewer hours. Administrative review pending. He nodded. Marion stopped him in the hallway once. "You look tired," she said. "Didn't sleep much." She glanced around. "They're digging into your past," she murmured, "requesting archived disciplinary transcripts." "I expected that." She searched his face. "Why now?" she asked. He didn't give her the full answer. "Because they're worried," he said. She didn't look convinced. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse felt colder. Reeves attended this one. He sat in the back again. Perfect posture. Expression neutral. Graham felt his presence like a shift in air pressure. The session opened with Reeves's counsel arguing procedural abuse. Lena's attorney countered with the technical inconsistencies already established. Then came the policy archive. Under court order, Hartwell Biotech's internal IT documentation was presented. Original security policy, dated 2 years prior. Executive token backup authentication permanently disabled unless direct written authorization from CEO, signed electronically. By Lena. The room quieted. The analyst scrolled further. "No subsequent written authorization found," he said. Reeves's counsel rose immediately. "Corporate practice may differ from written policy." "Then provide written amendment," Lena's attorney replied. None appeared. Graham watched the analyst's face. The confidence from the first session was gone. "Review system changelogs for March 13th, Graham said calmly. The analyst complied. A configuration update entry appeared. "Token backup re-enabled at 23:48, the analyst read. "Authorized by?" Lena's attorney asked. The analyst hesitated. "System admin override." "Credentials, D. Crane, and executive acknowledgement," Graham asked. "No confirmation record." Reeves' counsel stepped forward. "Administrative oversight does not equate to criminal conspiracy." "No," Graham agreed quietly. but it establishes unauthorized credential modification. Victor Reeves shifted slightly in his seat, small, but noticeable. Cross-reference device issuance time, Graham continued. The analyst pulled it up. March 14th, 0012. 24 minutes after policy override, Graham said. Silence pressed in. And the first data transfer occurred? Lena's attorney asked. March 28th, the analyst said. 2 weeks later, Graham murmured. Time to test the system. Time to build narrative. Reeves's counsel objected again, but the objection felt thinner. The judge overseeing the review leaned forward. Mr. Analyst, the judge said, is there any record of Miss Ayres, Hartwell personally authorizing the reactivation of token authentication? No, Your Honor. Is there record of her acknowledging issuance of device 7X441? No. And would system best practice require executive notification? Yes. A quiet exhale moved through the room. Not relief. Shift. Victor Reeves did not look rattled. He looked thoughtful. That unsettled Graham more. When the session adjourned, reporters were already gathering outside. Headlines would not declare her innocent yet. But doubt had entered the narrative. That mattered. Outside, Lena paused near the steps. You saw him, she said softly. Yes. He's calculating. Yes. She looked toward the street. He won't let this go. I know. She turned to him. You should step back now. He almost laughed. I'm already inside. Her gaze sharpened. This becomes dangerous when powerful people feel exposed. It already is. A long pause. Then, quietly, thank you. The words were simple, not dramatic. He nodded once. Across the street, Victor Reeves exited the building surrounded by aides. For a brief second, Reeves's eyes met Graham's. There was no anger there, no visible threat, just assessment, as if Graham were a variable newly introduced into an equation. The look lingered half a second too long. Then Reeves stepped into his car. That night, the black sedan did not appear outside Graham's apartment. That almost felt worse. Silence meant recalculation. He sat at his kitchen table again. The warning notes still folded beside him. They had exposed a scene. Not the whole structure, just one weak point, enough to destabilize narrative control. But systems built on money did not collapse because of a single crack. They reinforced. He knew that. He also knew something else now. This was never just about digital logs. It was about control over truth. And once someone attempted to rewrite truth in a courtroom, they rarely stopped at one attempt. He leaned back in his chair. The trap was visible now. Not fully, but enough to understand its edges, and stepping out of it was no longer an option. The board vote was scheduled for Friday. It wasn't announced publicly at first. It leaked. That was how these things worked. A quiet decision passed to a financial reporter. A speculative headline, market tremor before confirmation. Hardwell Biotech Board to consider interim leadership. Interim. Graham read the article twice. If Lena was removed as CEO before trial, narrative would harden around that decision. Investors would read it as internal doubt. Jurors would read it as implied guilt. Employees would fracture. Victor Reeves wouldn't need a conviction. He would need distance. Lena called him that evening. Not through the attorney this time. Direct. They're splitting, she said. Her voice was calm, but thinner than usual. How many? He asked. 4 firm. 2 undecided. 3 holding with me. 9 total, he said quietly. Yes. And the motion requires simple majority. Yes. Silence moved between them. I can't influence that from here, she said. No. I could step aside voluntarily, frame it as protecting the company. That would be interpreted as admission. Yes. She exhaled. He could hear the weight in it now. Not panic. Calculation layered over fatigue. They're afraid, she said, of shareholders, of exposure, of being tied to scandal. Fear moves faster than loyalty, he said. Yes. Another pause. "What would you do?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. He imagined sitting in a boardroom, cameras waiting outside, directors avoiding eye contact. "I would speak to the undecided too," he said. "Individually, not about innocence. About structure. Structure. Propose a temporary governance firewall. You retain CEO title, operational authority delegated to an independent compliance committee pending forensic outcome." Silence. "You think they'd accept that?" she asked. "They might," he said. "It reduces liability exposure without confirming guilt." She didn't respond right away. He could almost see her reviewing the angles. "You're not cautious anymore," she said again. "I am," he replied, "but caution doesn't mean silence." A small pause. "Graham," she said, "if I lose the vote, Reeves gains access to internal oversight." "Yes. And if that happens, evidence can disappear." "Yes." The word felt heavy. "I won't let that happen," she said. He believed her. But belief wasn't strategy. "You need documentation secured externally," he said, "encrypted backups beyond board reach." "I already have them," she replied. That surprised him. "Where?" "With someone who owes me nothing." He almost smiled. Good. The call ended without ceremony. The next morning, Graham was summoned to the courthouse administration office. Two people sat behind the desk. "Human Resources. We've completed a review of your employment file," the woman said evenly. "There are concerns regarding your involvement in ongoing litigation." "I visit someone in detention," he replied. "You've been identified as participating in legal strategy discussions." He didn't deny it. "Our institution must remain neutral," the man beside her added. "Your actions create potential conflict." "So you're terminating me," Graham said. The woman folded her hands. "Effective immediately." He nodded once. He had expected this. He signed the papers without argument. When he stepped outside, his cart remained parked near the service elevator. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he walked past. The loss felt strangely clean. He had been preparing for it. Still, as he exited the building for the last time, the air felt different against his skin. Less contained, more exposed. He called Lena. "They let you go," she said before he could speak. "How do you know?" "It reached me." He exhaled once. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. It's because of this." "Yes." A pause. "You can step back now," she said quietly. "No. You've already paid." "I haven't." Silence. "I don't regret it," he added. On the other end, he heard a shift in her breathing. "You shouldn't have to carry this," she said. "I'm choosing to." That mattered. The board vote convened in a private conference room at Hartwell Biotech headquarters. Lena attended remotely under council supervision. The press gathered outside the building, cameras pointed at glass. Graham watched the live financial coverage from his apartment. He felt more restless without the structure of a job. Too much steadiness. Lena's image appeared on screen during a brief statement before deliberation. She did not defend herself. She did not attack. She outlined the forensic findings, the unauthorized token reactivation, the pending independent review. Then she proposed it. The governance firewall, temporary compliance oversight without removal of executive authority. It was steady, direct, not emotional. When she finished, she didn't look relieved. She looked braced. The vote went into closed session. Minutes stretched. Graham stood instead of sitting. He didn't know what he would do if she lost. He didn't think in terms of losing. He thought in terms of next moves. His phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. They're leaning toward compromise. Graham exhaled slowly. 10 more minutes. Then the announcement. Board approves. Temporary governance oversight. CEO Lena Hartwell retains position pending trial. Not defeat. Not defeat. Space. Graham sat down finally. His hands felt heavier than they should. A knock sounded at his door. Sharp. Unexpected. He froze. Then stood. Opened it carefully. Daniel Crane stood in the hallway. Former head of security. Tall. Controlled expression. You shouldn't be here, Graham said. I thought we should talk, Crane replied. No. Crane's eyes flicked past him into the apartment. You've been busy, he said. So have you. A faint smile. You're out of your depth, Crane said quietly. I don't think so. Crane stepped slightly closer. You exposed a procedural oversight, he said. That's all. Unauthorized token reactivation isn't oversight. Crane's jaw tightened briefly. You don't understand the scale of what you're touching. Then explain it. Silence. Crane looked at him differently then. Not dismissive. Assessing. You think this is about corporate rivalry, Crane said. It's larger. How? Data control. Regulatory influence. International positioning. Hartwell Biotech stands in the way of certain integrations. Integrations with Reeves? Graham asked. Crane didn't answer directly. You stopped a board vote today, he said instead. That complicates timelines. Timelines for what? Crane's gaze hardened. For restructuring the industry. There it was. Not just money. Power consolidation. You're framing her to accelerate acquisition, Graham said quietly. Crane didn't confirm. He didn't deny. You should walk away, Crane said. You broke internal policy, Graham replied. You authorized token reactivation without CEO consent. Crane's expression cooled. Policy is flexible when stakes are high. That's not how law works. Crane gave him a long look. That's exactly how it works. The hallway felt narrower. If you had evidence of malicious intent, Crane continued calmly, you would have presented it. We're building it. A pause. You won't finish, Crane said. Then he turned and walked down the hall. Graham stood in the doorway until Crane disappeared around the stairwell. His heart beat harder now, not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't just an internal sabotage. It was strategic. Hartwell Biotech's independence blocked something larger: data consolidation, regulatory leverage, influence across sectors. Victor Reeves wasn't trying to destroy Lena. He was trying to absorb what she had built and frame her in the process. Graham closed the door slowly. He understood now why Reeves had remained calm. This wasn't personal. It was structural. And structures defended themselves with quiet force. He sat back down at his table. No job, no protection. A former lawyer with a history of negligence facing a man who rewrote industries. He felt the weight of it settle in his chest. Then he reached for his notebook. If the stakes were larger than one company, then the evidence would be two. Financial overlaps, partnership timing, security staff migration patterns. He began writing. Not frantically, carefully, because if Crane was right about scale, then this fight would not end with a single hearing. And speaking against a structure like that came with cost. He was already paying it. He didn't tell Lena about Crane's visit right away. He waited, not out of secrecy, out of timing. The next hearing was scheduled to determine whether the criminal charge would proceed to full trial or collapse into the forensic inconsistencies. If he told her now, it would sit in her mind during testimony. Distract, distort focus. Precision, he reminded himself, not reaction. He spent the next 2 days mapping connections. Crane's departure from Hartwell Biotech had been announced as voluntary, but the timeline was narrow: resignation submitted 3 days after Hartwell declined Reeves' joint venture proposal. Employment with Reeves' infrastructure began 2 weeks later. Severance records weren't public, but compensation estimates suggested a substantial increase. In isolation, that meant little. In context, it formed a line. He built another one. Reeves' overseas partner, the same firm allegedly receiving Hartwell's stolen data, had secured a new infrastructure contract in a country currently reviewing biotech data regulations. Regulations Hartwell had publicly opposed for privacy concerns. He stared at the web forming across his notes. Data consolidation, regulatory leverage, market positioning. Lena's independence wasn't an obstacle because of profit alone. It was an obstacle because she wouldn't align. That night, his phone rang after midnight. Unknown number. He answered anyway. You're persistent, Victor Reeves said. The voice was even, almost conversational. Graham didn't speak immediately. I prefer transparency, Reeves continued. Unnecessary friction wastes resources. You entered my apartment, Graham said. A pause. I don't involve myself in theatrics, Reeves replied, but people around me are protective. That's one word for it? Reeves exhaled softly. You're intelligent enough to recognize structural shifts, he said. Industries evolve. Consolidation is inevitable. Hartwell Biotech's integration would have ensured stability. By framing it CEO, Graham asked. Silence. You're assuming malicious intent, Reeves said. Sometimes systems correct inefficiencies. She's not an inefficiency. From certain perspectives, Reeves said calmly, she is. The words landed without heat. That was what unsettled Graham most. You're risking federal charges, Graham said. I am not on trial, Reeves replied. Yet. A faint pause. You've already lost your career once, Reeves said quietly. You rebuilt something modest, stable. Why dismantle that for someone who won't be able to protect you? Graham felt his pulse rise once. You looked into my past, he said. I look into everything that touches my interests. And what did you find? That you are competent, Reeves said, and that you carry regret. Silence stretched. You're trying to provoke me into overstepping, Graham said. I'm offering you an exit, Reeves replied. I don't need one. You will. The line went dead. Graham sat there in the dark, phone still in his hand. It hadn't been a threat, it had been assessment. Reeves believed in inevitability, that systems bend toward consolidation, that resistance exhausts itself. Graham set the phone down slowly. He understood now that this wasn't about proving Lena innocent in the narrow legal sense. It was about interrupting inevitability. And inevitability required belief to function. The hearing arrived under gray skies. The courtroom was fuller this time. Reporters, industry analysts, observers who pretended to be neutral. Lena entered without looking toward the gallery. Graham sat behind her attorney again. Reeves did not attend. Interesting. The prosecution opened with confidence, reiterating the existence of data transfers under Lena's credentials. Then Lena's attorney presented the expanded forensic findings: unauthorized token reactivation, sequential device IDs, timestamp drift inconsistencies, lack of executive acknowledgement. Then something new: an affidavit from Hartwell Biotech's current CTO confirming that no internal audit had authorized token reinstatement and that policy required CEO sign-off. The prosecutor objected. The judge allowed it. Then Lena's attorney introduced another document, an internal email chain obtained under subpoena, Cron, weeks before his resignation, discussing strategic alignment opportunities with a Reeves subsidiary executive. The email didn't mention sabotage. It didn't need to. It established contact. The prosecution shifted tone, from confident to cautious. The judge leaned forward. Given the irregularities in authentication authorization and the emerging evidence of potential internal compromise, the judge said slowly, this court finds probable cause insufficient to proceed on the current charge without further independent investigation. The words settled heavily. Charges dismissed without prejudice pending review. Not acquittal, but collapse. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Not applause, movement. Shift. Lena did not react outwardly. Her shoulders remained straight. Graham felt something loosen inside his chest that he hadn't realized was clenched. Outside, cameras erupted. Charges dismissed against Lena Hartwell. Temporary, conditional, but public. Reeves issued a statement within the hour. Reeves' infrastructure respects the court's decision and remains committed to ethical industry collaboration. Of course, distance, control. That evening, Lena met Graham in person for the first time outside detention walls. A quiet conference room. Minimal staff. Security controlled by her remaining loyal team. She looked at him directly. It's not over, she said. No. They'll regroup. Yes. She studied him. You lost your job. Yes. And you knew you would. He didn't answer. You could have stayed invisible, she said. I tried that once. A pause. Why didn't you tell me Crane visited you? He felt the question land. You had enough, he said. Her gaze didn't soften. We don't protect each other by withholding risk, she said quietly. He nodded once. You're right. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. What now? She asked. He looked at the table between them. They pivot, he said. Regulatory pressure. Civil suits, market destabilization. Yes. And we go on offense. She held his gaze. How? Expose the pattern, he said. Not just in your case, in others. Her brow shifted slightly. You think this isn't isolated? I know it isn't. He outlined the overseas contract, the regulatory shifts, the alignment incentives. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she leaned back slowly. That's larger than my company, she said. Yes. That's industry corruption. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. Then we document it, she said finally. We don't shout. We gather. He nodded. Systematically. A faint hint of something like resolve settled in her expression. Victor believes in inevitability, she said. He told you that? In different words. She looked toward the window. I built my company because I believed independence mattered, she said quietly. Not for control, for protection. He understood. For patience, she added. For data privacy. Yes. She looked back at him. Then we don't just defend, she said. We create something that counters this. He felt the direction shift, from reaction to intention. What are you suggesting? He asked. A legal and compliance initiative, she said slowly. Independent. Designed to audit and expose structural coercion across industries. He watched her carefully. That puts a target on you permanently. She nodded. It already is. Silence. And you? She asked. Where do you stand in that? He thought about his apartment, his empty schedule, the bar certificate in a box. I don't have a license, he said. Then you get one back, she replied. The words were simple, not dramatic. He felt something move in his chest that wasn't tension. Possibility. I was disbarred, he said quietly. Then we fight that too. He almost smiled. You don't do small battles, he said. No, she agreed. Outside the conference room, her team waited. The world outside was still unstable, investors cautious, Reeves recalculating. But inside the room, something steadier formed. Not romance, not triumph. Alignment. You understand this won't end cleanly, he said. I never expected it to, she replied. He nodded. Years ago he had walked away from law because the weight felt unbearable. Now the weight felt different. Chosen. They weren't finished. They were beginning something else. And beginnings, he had learned, were quieter than people expected. The charges were dismissed, but the story didn't end. It thinned. That was the strange part. Headlines moved on within days. Markets stabilized. Commentators shifted to the next scandal. The public memory of outrage shortened the way it always did. But structures don't forget. Reeves' infrastructure withdrew its motion to intervene. Cran resigned from his new position to pursue private opportunities. No admission. No apology. Clean exits. Too clean. Lena returned to headquarters the following Monday. There were no banners, no speeches. Employees stood when she walked through the main floor. Some clapped softly. Most just watched her. She paused near the center of the room. Back to work, she said simply. And they did. Graham stayed outside that building for the first week. Not because he wasn't welcome. Because he needed to decide who he was in this version of events. He had lost his job. His name had circulated quietly in legal circles again, some as reckless, some as stubborn. Thomas called him 3 days after the dismissal. You stirred something, Thomas said. Yes. Reeves won't forget that. I know. A pause. You could apply for reinstatement, Thomas added. The disciplinary board reconsiders cases after significant time. Graham leaned against his kitchen counter. I'd have to admit negligence again, he said. You already did. Yes. Silence. And I'd have to prove I've changed. You have, Thomas said. Graham didn't answer right away. Change wasn't something you declared. It showed in pressure. He met Lena in her office later that week. The room was larger than he expected. Glass walls. City skyline beyond. She closed the door herself. You're avoiding being seen here, she observed. Yes. Why? Because visibility has consequences. She studied him. You're still thinking like someone who expects to be removed, she said. He felt that land. Maybe he was. I don't belong in your corporate structure, he said. I'm not asking you to. She walked to her desk and picked up a thin folder. This is preliminary incorporation paperwork, she said. Nonprofit legal initiative. Independent oversight. Whistleblower protection. Digital audit advocacy. He looked at it but didn't touch it. You serious? Yes. Reeves will see it as provocation. He already does. Silence settled between them. I need someone who understands both systems, she said quietly. Corporate and courtroom. Someone who won't be impressed by power. He let out a slow breath. My license. File for reinstatement, she interrupted. If they deny it, we appeal. You assume that fight is winnable. I assume it's necessary. Her gaze didn't waver. He realized something then. She wasn't asking him to rescue her anymore. She was inviting him to stand beside her. Different weight. He took the folder. It felt heavier than paper should. The reinstatement hearing was scheduled 2 months later. In those 2 months, they built quietly. The initiative, provisionally named the Hartwell-Keaton Foundation, didn't announce itself with fanfare. It gathered advisors, former compliance officers, retired judges willing to consult discreetly, cybersecurity analysts independent of major firms. Graham worked without salary at first. He rented out his apartment's second room to cover expenses. He didn't mind. He felt steadier than he had in years. The reinstatement hearing took place in a room smaller than he remembered. 3 panel members. 1 stenographer. He stood alone at the front. Lena did not attend. That was intentional. This had to be his. You were disbarred for negligence, the chairperson said, submitting unverified financial documentation that materially impacted a criminal case. Yes. You accepted responsibility at the time. Yes. And now? He felt his pulse, but it was controlled. Now I understand that stepping away was incomplete accountability, he said. I should have continued serving the system I failed. A pause. You involved yourself recently in high-profile litigation despite lacking licensure, another panel member said. Yes. Why? He didn't rush. Because I recognized structural manipulation, he said. And I knew how to see it. You acted without authority. Yes. And you lost your employment as a result. Yes. Silence. Do you regret intervening? The chairperson asked. He thought about the night in his apartment. The warning note. Reeves' phone call. No, he said. A longer pause this time. Why not? Because the alternative was watching it happen again. The room was very quiet, not hostile, just attentive. After deliberation, they called him back in. Reinstatement granted under probationary review, the chairperson said. 2-year monitoring period. Ethical compliance oversight. He felt something shift in his chest. Not relief exactly. Realignment. Thank you, he said. Outside the building, the air felt lighter. He didn't call anyone immediately. He stood on the steps for a minute. Then he called Lena. It's done, he said. Good, she replied. Just that. No celebration. When he arrived at her office that evening, she was reviewing documents. She looked up. Counselor, she said quietly. He almost smiled. Probationary, he corrected. That's enough. They sat across from each other in silence for a moment. The Foundation's first formal investigation targeted not Reeves directly, but a pattern. 3 mid-sized biotech firms had reported regulatory pressure, followed by acquisition attempts from subsidiaries tied loosely to Reeves's network. Whistleblower complaints hinted at coordinated compliance audits designed to overwhelm smaller companies. Nothing illegal on the surface, just strategic pressure. Systems don't collapse from accusation, Lena said. They collapse from exposure. Yes, we move methodically. Yes. There was a steadiness between them now that hadn't existed at the beginning. Not urgency, purpose. He noticed her hands no longer trembled when she rested them on the table. He also noticed she slept less. He did too. But it wasn't from fear. It was from work. One evening, long after staff had left, they stood by the window overlooking the city. "You realize this may define the rest of our careers," he said. "Yes. And it will make enemies." "Yes." She turned toward him slightly. "You could still choose something quieter." He considered that. A small firm, low-profile cases, predictable days. He shook his head. "I tried quiet," he said. She held his gaze. There was no dramatic shift, no declaration, just understanding. Outside, the city moved the way it always did. Inside, something had changed in both of them. Not triumph. Orientation. The dismissal of charges hadn't restored things to what they were. It had redirected them, and redirection carried its own cost. The first formal complaint filed under the Foundation's name didn't mention Victor Reeves. It didn't need to. It documented a pattern of coordinated regulatory audits targeting independent biotech firms within weeks of declining partnership offers, from subsidiaries connected indirectly, carefully to a larger infrastructure network. Names, dates, policy citations, funding overlaps, no adjectives, just structure. Graham insisted on that. "Let the pattern speak," he said. Lena agreed. They submitted the report to a federal oversight committee and, separately, to 3 investigative journalists known for patience rather than noise. Then they waited. Waiting felt different now, not helpless, measured. 2 weeks later, one of the journalists published a piece. Not explosive. Careful. Coordinated compliance pressure raises questions in biotech sector. It didn't accuse Reeves. It asked. That was enough. Within days, 2 former compliance officers from separate firms contacted the Foundation confidentially. Their stories aligned. Internal memos encouraging alignment discussions following audit initiation. Advisory board members with prior ties to Reeves's network recommending acquisition to mitigate exposure. It wasn't illegal on its face. It was coercive in tone. The difference mattered. Lena read each testimony slowly. She didn't speak for a long time afterward. "He builds inevitability," she said finally. "Yes." "Make resistance seem impractical." "Yes." She closed the folder. "Then we make resistance viable." Graham nodded. They expanded the Foundation's advisory circle quietly. A retired appellate judge agreed to consult. A cybersecurity firm with no corporate entanglements offered pro bono forensic analysis for whistleblowers. Funding came from Lena personally at first, then from 2 anonymous donors. The structure grew. Not loudly. Intentionally. Reeves responded the way Graham expected. Public statements about supporting industry collaboration. Private legal letters warning against defamatory insinuation. One arrived at Graham's office on a Tuesday morning. He read it once, then set it down. No anger. Just recognition. Pressure again. He called Lena. "They're escalating rhetorically," he said. "Good," she replied. "Why good?" "Because rhetoric precedes miscalculation." He considered that. Victor Reeves had built a reputation on composure, but composure required control, and control weakened under exposure. A month later, a federal subcommittee announced a preliminary inquiry into regulatory coordination practices within biotech oversight. Reeves's name wasn't mentioned, but the sectors implicated overlapped with his holdings. Graham watched the announcement from the Foundation's small conference room. He didn't feel victory. He felt a shift of gravity. Later that evening, he found Lena alone in her office. The lights were low. "You saw it," she said without turning. "Yes." She remained facing the window. "This will get louder," she said. "Yes." "And more personal." "Yes." Silence. Then she turned toward him. "Are you afraid?" she asked. He thought about the apartment door left ajar months ago. The warning note, the job he no longer had. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. "So am I." The honesty settled between them. Not dramatic. Grounded. Fear acknowledged but not centered. He stepped closer to the window beside her. The city looked the same as it had the day she was let out in cuffs. But it wasn't. Because they weren't. "I used to think success meant scale," she said quietly. "Market share. Influence." He listened. "Now I think it means restraint," she added. "Knowing when not to consolidate." He almost smiled. "That's not a popular philosophy." "No." A pause. "You changed something in me," she said. He looked at her. "How?" "I used to fight alone," she said. "I thought that was strength." "And now?" "Now I understand structure matters more than individual force." He absorbed that. "And you?" she asked. "What changed?" He considered carefully. "I don't confuse punishment with accountability anymore," he said. "Losing my license felt like balance being restored. It wasn't. It was avoidance." She watched him. "You stepped back in," she said. "Yes." "And you stayed." "Yes." The space between them felt steady. Not fragile. Not urgent. Just aligned. Months passed. The subcommittee hearings widened. Months passed. The subcommittee hearings widened. Internal emails surfaced publicly, carefully redacted, but suggestive, showing coordination between audit scheduling and acquisition overtures. Reeves testified once. Calm. Measured. Denied direct orchestration. He wasn't charged. He wasn't removed. Structures rarely collapse overnight. But influence shifted. Partnership offers slowed. Regulatory bodies adopted stricter transparency protocols. Small firms contacted the foundation before entering negotiations. Inevitability cracked. Not shattered. But interrupted. One afternoon, nearly a year after the cuffs clicked around Lena's wrists, she and Graham returned to the same courthouse. Not as defendant and observer. As presenters. The foundation had been invited to speak at a judicial ethics symposium on digital evidence integrity. He stood at the podium this time. Licensed. Probationary status nearly complete. He didn't recount the story dramatically. He outlined procedural vulnerabilities. Authentication manipulation. Log rewriting risks. He spoke evenly. No grand declarations. When he finished, there was polite applause. Afterward, in the hallway where he had once pushed a cart, he paused. The tile floor looked the same. The fluorescent lights hummed the same way. Lena stopped beside him. "You're thinking about it," she said. "Yes." "What?" "The day they led you out." She was quiet. "I remember your hand shaking," he said. She looked down at her wrist briefly. "I remember you looking away," she replied. He almost smiled. "I wasn't ready," he said. "And now?" He considered that. "Now I don't look away?" She nodded. They walked toward the exit together. No cameras. No spectacle. Outside, the air felt ordinary. Traffic moved. People crossed streets. Nothing about the scene suggested history, but inside him, something had settled. He no longer felt like a man trying to correct a past mistake. He felt like someone aligned with his work. Not to win. Not to defeat a billionaire, but to prevent inevitability from going unchallenged. Beside him, Lena walked with the same steady posture she'd had that first day. But there was less stillness in it now. Less containment. More choice. They didn't speak as they reached the sidewalk. They didn't need to. The fight against corruption wasn't finished. It probably never would be. But it had shape now. Structure. And that was enough.